I'm Daniel Freisinger, and this is episode 12 of Pikes Peak Weekly, found on the net at
pnn.tv. There are times when you
pnn.tv.
gotta stand steady. There are other times when you gotta be ready.
For those of you that caught my last show, you know I did a segment on the Planning Commission, the City Planning Commission, and how they were trying to use zoning to keep medical marijuana dispensaries out of the city and to close down at least a third of them. Well, it turns out during that meeting, they didn't open up the meeting to public comment. And looks like they may have ticked off a few of the city council members. They've got the mayor, Lionel Rivera, saying, what part of public meeting didn't they get? They've got the vice mayor, Larry Small, saying, well, we need to kick this back to them and make them do it over. And you've got three of the council members. We've got Sean Page saying, you know, basically, what was it? Sean Page has said that they milked the issue for too long. We need to just forget about them and let's move on as the city council. We got Bernie Herpin, who said, you know, they probably saved us a lot of time because it looks like their minds were made up by the time they got there. He said, you know, his idea is they said 400 feet when they did the pre-application, and he doesn't see any reason that should change. And then we had a comment from Tom Gallagher, who just said not taking public comment was just plain wrong. And Tom Gallagher has been very supportive of the medical marijuana dispensaries this whole time. So it's going to be an interesting meeting. The second week of December, there's a city council meeting, and they're going to discuss the recommendation, and hopefully the city council at that point will just make their own decision based on what they hear from the public. So that's going to be open to the public comment. If you have something you want to say about it, it would be good to get down there for that. And I'll mention next week the exact date of that. Well, in the next segment, we're going to be talking about the president's announcement to freeze federal pay or freeze salaries for federal workers for the next 2 years. And here's a quick music break before we head out to that.
Wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. But here I am in New York City, hiding out in Central Park, getting kidnapped by the police today sometime before dark. But I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. The judge looked down upon me frowning.
Well, Congress started back up this week, but the president seems to want to beat them to the punch when it comes to cutting spending. He held a press conference this morning where he announced a 2-year pay freeze for federal employees other than active duty military. So he seems to be buying into this same false logic that big government has caused this deficit and our economy's bad because of big government, which is just some little issue that the GOP grabbed a hold of so that they'd have something to mobilize the people for the last election. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Today I'm proposing a 2-year pay freeze for all civilian federal workers. This would save $2 billion over the rest of this fiscal year and $28 billion in cumulative savings over the next 5 years. Now, I want to be clear. This freeze does not apply to the men and women of our armed forces, who, along with their families, continue to bear enormous burdens with our nation at war. I did not reach this decision easily. This is not just a line item on a federal ledger. These are people's lives. They're doctors and nurses who care for our veterans, scientists who search for better treatments and cures, men and women who care for our national parks and secure our borders and our skies, Americans who see that the Social Security checks get out on time, who make sure that scholarships come through, who devote themselves to our safety. They're patriots who love their country and often make many sacrifices to serve their country. In these challenging times, we want the best and brightest to join and make a difference. But these are also times where all of us are called on to make some sacrifices, and I'm asking civil servants to do what they've always done, play their part. Going forward, we're going to have to make some additional very tough decisions that this town has put off for a very long time.
You bet we've been putting off these cuts for too long. How about 2008, when the government ATM machine was running full steam ahead so that we could bail out banks and insurance companies that could turn it around and hand it out in big bonuses to their employees, or the ones that were shipping it off to foreign banks because they had purchased insurance and the damn insurance company didn't store enough money to cover their losses. These are the clowns that have created this economic mess. These are the clowns that have put us into 10% unemployment, if you believe the numbers that the government's feeding us. And yet, the president wants to get up here and he wants to start talking about cutting working class salaries. These federal employees are not highly paid people. There's a nice myth out there that government employees are living fat and happy on the government dole, but that just doesn't pan out. I want to show you, or I want to tell you about a couple of the wages. I went and did a search on usajobs.gov. Anybody can do it. And what I did is I pulled up a few jobs that are right here in Colorado Springs. So give me a second here and let's take a look at these jobs. The first job I found was an instructor of electrical and computer engineering for the Air Force Academy. And now this job requires a master's degree, and the pay offered is $46,000 a year. That doesn't sound unreasonable to me for somebody who's got a master's degree. Next, we have one I love. For the hard work of receiving a PhD, you can become an assistant economics professor up at the academy and make just under $56,000 a year. Again, it doesn't seem that unreasonable for somebody with a PhD to be making over $50,000 a year. The last example I have for you is actually a nationwide listing, so the pay varies depending on your area. If you're in a more expensive area, there is a portion of your pay on top of your base pay to cover living expenses for living in a high-cost area. Like if you're living up in Denver, Boulder area, you make a little more than if you're living out in the Midwest somewhere where there's a lower cost of living. But for a licensed practical nurse, the pay is between $28,000 and $45,000 a year. Now that 45, I'm sure, is if you're Washington, D.C. or some extremely high cost of living area. But it's also based on experience and education. But the fact is, we have nurses taking care of our wounded veterans that are making $30,000 a year. And somehow people think these are overpaid government workers. $30,000 a year will barely put a roof over your head and food on the table. These cut big spending, cut big government arguments may seem like good politics during election year. But the real issue here that nobody wants to discuss is the reason our government keeps growing is because our national security, national defense spending. We spend so much money on TSA. We have created whole new departments since 9/11, and nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the tax cuts that are killing us because they were unfunded. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that we've had unfunded wars going on for over a decade. No, what we got to talk about is how we can stick the working class for the bill for all these decisions that they didn't have any part of. One more thing I wanted to cover before we stop this, before we go on to another subject here, is the difference between civilian pay for non-government employees and civilians that work for the government is anywhere between 22% and 26%. There's disputed numbers there. One's from a USA Today. The 26% comes from a USA Today article. The 22 is an average put out by the Office of Personnel Management. But these federal employees are making less than their non-government counterparts. Now, there's a lot of people out there who, for political gain, would like to have you believe that government workers are just fat and happy and living off of your tax dollars. But it simply does not play out that way when you look at the facts. At the end of the clip that I played you, the president mentions that there's going to be some hard decisions to make over the next year. And I tend to believe that these hard decisions, what he means by that is it's going to be hard on you and me. I just can't see that they mean this is going to be hard on corporate America, who seems to think that the workers in this country need to foot the bill for national security and infrastructure and the many things that make it a good environment for them to make the money that they make. There's no way that the Bush tax cuts are going to be allowed to expire, which would take care of a lot of this deficit issue. So we can look forward to them trying to balance the budget on the backs of the working class. And considering the fact that we're in the worst recession since the Great Depression, there's a good chance that they're going to send us right back over the edge, and we're going to be right back into recession this coming year. These guys don't give a damn about what they do to the working class as long as it helps their political career with the people that are funding their elections. Like many issues, a lot of this comes back down to money in the pocket to make sure that they can run their new campaign, to buy corporate media time, that they can brainwash the lemmings that seem to be very prevalent in our society. It's time that we turn off the damn cable news and start learning stuff for ourselves so that we can put our foot down and make sure that the government realizes that they work for us. I can't emphasize that on this show enough. These are our employees. You pay their salary. I pay their salary. And they seem to be forgetting that. So it's up to us to remind them of that. That's about all the time we have, but I just wanted to give you some exciting news. As of last week, we've been accepted into the iTunes store, so you can now find Pikes Peak Weekly on iTunes under the podcast directory. So you might have to search for us a little bit. We're not real well known. But thank you for listening to the show, and have a good week. We'll talk to you next week. This has been Daniel Freisinger with Pikes Peak Weekly, found at pnn.tv.
When the rich man on the TV said this world's mine, when he asked which side you're on, told you to step in line, when he gave his reasons for his war of conquest, when he talked about your wallet, said it was in your interest, did you shrug your shoulders? Do as you were told, hang a flag in your